With this MLB season officially in the rearview mirror, the Phillies have already turned a page to next season with Rob Thomson and Dave Dombrowski meeting to speak with the media today. There were some very pointed comments directly hinting about the future of Nick Castellanos that I think caught everyone a bit by surprise. I do want to break down the latest of what exactly was said, what this means for the future of Castellanos, and why I think the writing is officially on the wall that he has played his last game in a Phillies uniform. So let's get right into the story of today. I was tapped into the press conference. Shout out to MLB.com for streaming it. Our guy Luke Arcani in the buildings asking questions himself, but nonetheless I had to take it in from back here. I was working a little bit of my other job as well. But nonetheless, to start off with the quote, the headline here, this article from Ty Daubert here saying, Dave Dombrowski, quote, "We'll see what happens with Nick Castellanos in 2026. And I will note that there were several questions about Castellanos, several pointed questions and sort of leading questions to the, we know that there's a bit of a, rift between Rob Thomson and Nick Castellanos. What has that been like? Is that anything you've been involved with? Dave Dombrowski himself addressing and acknowledging that he has taken a part of that. Now, to dive into the quotes before I dive too deep down this rabbit hole, and it starts out this article from Ty writing, the veteran hitter has a season remaining on his 5-year, $100 million contract, but can the Phillies and Castellanos continue on for another year? Quote, "We'll see what happens," team president of baseball operations Dave Dombrowski said Thursday at an end-of-season news conference at Citizens Bank Park. I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to get into specific players that are on a roster under contract, but the things you talked about are accurate, but we'll see what happens. And those things that were talked about were directly the kind of relationship or rocky relationship with Rob Thomson there that he did not dispute and, in fact, directly confirmed. Now, to continue on a little bit deeper into these quotes here that I did want to pull up, quote, "Usually, my take on those kind of things are behind closed doors, really is what it comes down to," Dombrowski said. "I've said this in the past. This is by no means the first incident I've ever had with players like this. Usually, you have almost one every year, sometimes more than that. It usually doesn't come quite as public as this, but I usually, in my situation, settle it behind the scenes when I get involved, and I think that's the most appropriate fashion for me to handle it." It's worth noting that Dombrowski has a history with Castellanos that dates back to the start of the player's professional career. Dombrowski was the general manager of the Tigers when they drafted Castellanos in the first round in 2010, where he made his major league debut with Detroit in 2013. And of course, Dombrowski signed Castellanos to the large contract with the Phillies. But at this point, it's hard to imagine the Phillies giving Castellanos regular playing time unless he can seriously bounce back from his rough 2025. And it's equally hard to imagine Castellanos being happy with a full season in a limited role. Now, I think a lot of times the actual issues here get quite distorted, that there's always a little bit of a scapegoat, that Nick Castellanos can talk about the communication with Rob Thomson. He can point to different reasonings, maybe unfair treatment from the fans, however he wants to slant it. The bottom line here is Nick Castellanos is no longer an everyday player, and he's not happy about this. Now, to directly address what his production was this year, he had 17 home runs, 72 RBIs, a .294 on-base percentage, which he would love to be higher there, 400% slugging percentage, had 137 hits and 133 strikeouts across his 547 at-bats here. He still played a ton. This was a guy that, for the most part, was a regular part of this Phillies team, and is still a guy that came up with some big moments when the team needed it. Let's not forget that RBI in the postseason, one of the faint signs of life that the offense did have. I personally am certainly more positive of Nick Castellanos than is the general perception here, the general conception, whatever people generally believe here. I think that it's pretty universally viewed the door is shut. I would keep it open a little bit on my end. I don't know if the relationship is worth rebuilding. I will note that Rob Thomson did take a much higher route in answering questions, and what he said directly when asked about Nick Castellanos is he said, quote, "My perspective is it's good. I never hold any grudges, and if I have a problem with a player or another coach, it doesn't linger. I'm always a guy that's going to turn a page on that type of thing." And for Rob Thomson together, say what you want about him as manager, man. What a 10 out of 10 human being. Just an absolute beauty with all that kind of stuff. Him embracing Kirkring in the way he did, the way that he carries himself. I do have a great bit of respect for Rob Thomson as a man. We can have the conversation about him as manager. I personally have voiced my opinion here that I just don't see a better alternative out there on the open market, that I get the frustrations, the immediate reaction, fire somebody, change something, but the grass is not always greener, and I think that is the realization the Phillies came to in keeping him around with this Phillies franchise. Now, to bring it back to the outfield picture here, the thing that complicates this even further is the frustration being that Nick Castellanos was not the everyday player. Well, who will be next year? And that is a loaded question, because when looking at the contracts that remain on the books here, that we do know Nick Castellanos under contract for $20 million next year. Harrison Bader, a mutual option for $10 million, which will be very interesting to see how it plays out. Outside of that, it is Johan Rujas, it is Brewer Hicklin, and Brandon Marsh there with an arbitration eligible sort of tags there. Bader is going to be an interesting one. We did basically get the door slammed on the Max Kepler experience here in Philadelphia, as when he was asked about Kepler, Dave Dombrowski, that is, says Dave Dombrowski said he thought Max Kepler did a solid job for the Phillies year, but, quote, he's not going to most likely be back because he's a free agent and we have Justin Crawford. And this little youth movement is interesting to me. Now, I thought Justin Crawford was going to receive his opportunity this season. That obviously did not come to fruition. There was also talk about Aiden Miller speaking about how when he comes up, they expect him to be an everyday player. I don't think that's going to be next year. I think this is probably we're 2 or 3 seasons away from that, to be perfectly honest. I think Miller is closer to ready than that timeline there, but I think that they are going to, push the envelope, that you have to find a place for him if you're going to make that. Andrew Painter was asked about as well, and it does feel like this injection of youth talent is more the direction that they're going, that it does. All signs are pointing to a bit of a repackaged core and trying for different results there. We'll see how the dust settles, as the outfield is a clear area where there can be upgraded. Again, Castellanos, who's the probably most likely to be moved at this stage of the game. That's the only guy under contract reliably here. That yes, Marsh will be around, and maybe he ends up playing on a consistent basis. Rojas will be very interesting to see what they elect to do with. I would love to have Harrison Bader back. I frankly think he was a perfect fit for this Phillies outfield, but I also think it's worth noting that he played significantly above what his historic baseball card is and who he's been for his career. Now, for this specific season, he's had 17 home runs, 54 RBIs, a 347% on-base percentage, had 124 hits across his 448 at-bats, and one of the concepts that was brought up in the specific press conferences, things could have been different if Harrison Bader didn't get hurt at the worst possible time for this Phillies team. That may be true. That may be a loser mentality there. They also asked directly about the thought process behind Bader has played above what his statistical norm is, and what does that mean? And both Rob Thomson, more so Rob Thomson, with this response basically saying, I don't think that's like an outlier performance. I think he figured something out in his game, that he made some changes to his swing that directly translated into more production here, and that's a play that we're interested in. So I would like for Bader to be back, but there's a lot of moving parts with his outfield. When I say that there, that feels like the pathway to upgrading this Phillies team. Now, we can swing for the jugular, we can have our Kyle Tucker conversations or whatever the case may be, but the bottom line is when you look at all the positions that are locked into this Phillies team, Trey Turner is going nowhere. Bryce Harper, a little bit of position versatility. They did bounce out the idea of him possibly heading back to the outfield, but Dave Dombrowski did not seem too keen on that, and also mentioned that Bryce has requested that before if it would help this Phillies team, which I thought was worth noting there. The bottom line is there's a lot of moving parts. It's all going to start with the outfield, and it does not feel like it's going to involve Nick Castellanos right whatsoever. So we'll be very curious what this process is. Obviously, he is under contract. It needs to be traded, or there needs to be some sort of agreement that is reached here. It's disappointing that this is the end of the Nick Castellanos role, because how I will remember him and what he brought to this team, it's a guy who gave you what he got. It's a guy who competed, a guy who wanted to be out there every day, a guy who played through injury for most of this season, who came up with some really big hits. That doesn't change the fact that he swung at every down and away slider, that he had some of the worst plate discipline of any MLB player that I've ever heard, that he got far too frustrated in his feelings with this fan base this season that I'm still not quite sure. You can be mad at Rob Thomson. You don't need your wife fighting your battles on Twitter, which was really a theme of this season, and I don't think helped anyone, but I still will remember Nick Castellanos positively. I think this was a guy who helped change this era of Phillies baseball, and it is unfortunate this is how it's going to have to end. There is also a clear pathway to, if you can get a better player at that exact position for a somewhat similar price tag, that maybe that is the type of needle-moving addition that changes the trajectory of this Phillies team. But I think one of the clear takeaways from the media availability today is that the Nick Castellanos era in Philadelphia is set to be over. How exactly that is going to be decided is to be determined, but it does not seem to be a secret whatsoever that these guys are not on the same page. Nick Castellanos doesn't want to be here, and it does seem like that feeling is mutual. So we'll see how this resolves itself right now, but pretty pointed and not subtle messages coming from the Phillies front office on what his future is. So shout out to Rob Thomson for taking the high road. I guess shout out to Dave Dombrowski for putting on that table and being honest in that way, but it's going to be very interesting to see what that ultimate conclusion is and how they can find a way to improve this team while moving on from Cassie directly. But let me know what you guys think in the comments about that. What is your level of surprise? I think this is something we all knew was going on behind the scenes here, but the fact that it was just that openly addressed is a little bit stunning to me. So drop your thoughts in the comments. Appreciate you guys tuning in this video as always. I know it is the offseason, but we got plenty more to get into right here on Phillies Digest, and we will not be going anywhere. So make sure you're smashing that subscribe button if you have not already. Drop a like on this video. We'll be back talking to you next time right here on Phillies Digest. Peace.